So we got some interesting news this week. White population declines for the first time in U.S. history, new census expected to say.
What? Can't be true.
I'm sure that anyone that follows the trends has seen this coming for a while now. And every time I see a headline like this, I really don't know how to feel about it. The part of me thinks, yeah, this is good. And then I start thinking from the point of view of white Americans, how must this make them feel? And beyond just like the personal experience that someone may have to know that their group is diminishing, we have all of the baggage that's attached to a headline like this,
Hmm.
where there's a lot of people that exploit these headlines to scare and do dog whistle politics and make Americans think that they're losing their way of life. So it is such a overloaded topic, and every time you get headlines like this, you're gonna get the conservatives that are going to, like I said, go out there and try to rile up the population, and then you have the nationalists too that latch onto these things and say, oh, our way of life is ending, we need to close the borders.
Yes, I think that I certainly understand what you're saying, because I do think that these type of headlines are meant to catch your attention, and you're definitely right. I think these are the type of headlines that make Trump supporters and some of those conservative folks really fearful that one of the reasons why we got to make America great again. I do wonder, because I'm sure that back in the original census and the first census in the US, I'm sure that there were a lot more brown and native people in the continent that were uh, here at the time, but obviously they were not counted. Um, and I think my big contention with this, well, a couple of things as it relates specifically to the census in 2020. So many things going on. We had a pandemic. There was no uh, outreach that could be done in person. The Trump administration probably created a lot of a chilling effect by saying that they were going to try to capture immigration status. They actually stopped the count early. So, the 2020 census by itself is very problematic. But I think the other point for me is that the fact that white and the white identity can be so fluid, right? So I know it says, and some of the headlines I've seen says non-Hispanic whites.
Right.
So meaning that there are whites that are Hispanic. So, that means that I'm sure that if you count the people within the Latino community who consider themselves white racially, even if they're not white, but they just, because of their colonized minds, they put white on the census form, they would probably still make quote unquote the white identity the majority.
Yeah, but the trend is going in the direction that the country is becoming more diverse, and you do see a growth in the Hispanic population, and we've had like zero population growth in the white community for a long time, and now this is saying that it's declining. And when I referred earlier about the reason why my instinct always says, well, this is a good thing, but it's hard to articulate, it's just because there's so many different layers there. Apart from the fact that, yeah, it's good that I'm Hispanic and our group is increasing, but why, right? If we look into that, why does that feel good? And it's not like, yeah, part of it is, I think, is selfish, if I'm being honest, but the truth is that just the more diverse the country becomes, I'm hoping that a lot of these invisible barriers that we have will become less and less significant, because people, the more they mix, the more they are amongst each other, the more they realize that they have so much in common, and then they can finally focus on things that really divide them, which is more like class status, wealth. And
Hmm.
so I'm thinking that, yeah, that's a good thing, but at the same time, like, look at a situation like in Brazil, where a very small percentage of the population has all the wealth and they have all the political power. So that could easily become the US. So just because the Hispanic population is growing does not necessarily translate to political power. It translates to some political power, but not proportionate to the amount of Hispanics that are in this country, because they'll just do gerrymandering and they'll redistrict, right? So Yeah, it's a good thing. I like it because I do see it's a good trend to go towards. But at the same time, it's like even Hispanics, right? Even like you mentioned, these non-white or these so-called Hispanics that are more closely maybe aligned with a white identity, and even the general Hispanic population, their political leanings are very conservative in a lot of areas that I don't agree with. For example, religious, anti abortion. So there's a big segment of the population, of the Hispanic population, that is really conservative. So is that equate? Does that equate to a good thing? I don't think so, because I'm super progressive and liberal, and so I don't see those as positive things. And then at the same time, gives all of these nationalist groups a headline, a recruiting tool that they can then use to then go and try to foment and try to spread fear among all these other like insecure young teenagers that think that somehow just because the Hispanic population is increasing, that somehow that means that their race has to completely be erased. And it's like, dude, there's no fucking way, man. Like if all of a sudden they're gonna disappear tomorrow. So they just definitely try to use those loaded words to scare the population and get clicks on Facebook, get clicks on YouTube, or try to make their white nationalist groups grow.
So a few things on that. I think as it relates to also kind of busting this myth that there's this white purity or this purity of race, which is not the case. I think even the first settlers, whether they were the Anglo or the Spanish, it also included people from all over the world, right? So like even before quote unquote the discovery of the Americas, there was a lot of mixing, some mixing in Europe of Northern Africa, Spain, other parts of the world where people were mixing. You had Jewish and all these traditions. There was a connection with Asia as well, Turkey, all those parts of the world. So like there's not this thing, this such thing as a like a pure white definition, right?
Well,
And then
that concept of whiteness didn't even exist
it
before.
did not, and it was kind of developed in order to sort of justify
Yeah,
slavery,
the subjugation of the other race, which
other
was
people's,
the
yeah.
slaves. And yeah, and it's actually, it reminds me that you're totally right, because the remember the this was around the time that Spain had kicked out most of the Muslims, but it's not like they went in and I mean they expelled a lot of Muslims after the Reconquista, but a lot of them converted to Catholicism. A lot of them gave
Yeah,
up,
I mean, they
or
had been there for
yeah,
over 800 years, so
and
there's also a lot of mixing already.
and then they wanted to win the favor of the new ruling class, so they said, okay, yeah, we'll go to the new world and we'll do what you want us to. So a lot of them ended up coming over here, Middle Eastern, or more Spanish that had been mixed with Middle Eastern too. So yeah.
And yeah, and that's a funny thing because I'm looking at the sort of the question for the 2020 census now, and when you look at what includes white, they include examples German, Irish, English, Italian, Lebanese, Egyptian. So there's a lot of Arabs that are included in the quote unquote definition of white. And I don't know whether or not you think that an Egyptian, Lebanese, Iranian American would consider themselves white or something else.
Well, I do know that that definition is very broad, but honestly, I don't even look. I don't really pay much attention to that. I pay more attention to the group that has the wealth. That's really what
Yeah.
matters. I mean, there's a lot of white people without any wealth. They're getting screwed over just the same way that that a lot of blacks and Hispanics and other people in low socioeconomic status are. And the wealth right now is still concentrated predominantly in the white, whether or not they are mixed. I don't think it really matters. I think it's more of an identity that has been constructed, and it's very powerful, right? So I try to focus more on that.
Yeah, and I think that's why the census is so important because it is a head count and it's supposed to inform the representation that we have in Congress. But more importantly, what the political system is really the allocation of resources, and how do you retain or allocate those resources is by having the power, right? So I think that that's one of the reasons why now with this data, even though work had already started, now the partisans on both sides, but the Republicans have the upper hand in this case since they have a lot of the control of the state houses that are going to be redrawing and approving these districts.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they're trying to conserve power, right? So you have political power, you make the policies that favor your interest, and you continue consolidate your position and pin people against each other.
Yeah,
So that's one of the reasons why this number is so important,
yeah, and
and the census is so
I
important.
don't know if people really understand just how detrimental gerrymandering is to the communities of Hispanics and African Americans. Because when I was younger, I didn't really pay much thought to it. I thought, okay, they're redistricting, they're redrawing the lines, and that's really messed up. So, right, we shouldn't allow that. We should push back against that. But I always thought, ultimately, if our population keeps increasing, then ultimately that's only going to be so effective. And I think it was, but then they start getting really creative with how they do these things. In addition to gerrymandering, I read this somewhere, and I don't know if it was you that I was talking to about this, but what they've done in certain areas is that you know how we have these like BS laws, like three strikes laws that put a lot of African Americans and Hispanics in prison because of like stupid like carrying around weed or other like stupid minor offenses. So what ends up happening is you take all of these people off the streets and you take them to jails, and a lot of the jails are in actually areas that are predominantly like Republican conservative, but obviously they put them outside of the areas that were so people feel safe enough. So essentially, you're shifting people from the cities. You're taking away that political power, that power to vote, and you're moving them to prisons in conservative areas. And then not only that, but they get to use those inmates in the head count to increase the funding for those areas that are conservative. So it increases their political power. So they're very clever in how they do this. So if the ruling class feels that the Hispanic population is increasing, then they're just going to try to get more and more creative to take away political power from them. So we have to be really careful with that.
Yeah, no, it's true, and I think and I not only that, but then they sort of restrict those formerly incarcerated
Oh yeah.
people's rights to vote, and or put a bunch of other difficult things that they paying fees. And I know that's something that they did in Florida and Miami, well, Florida, and I know that that's something that impacted voting in a very critical state. But you're right. I think and the challenge is, how are we not only creative within the Hispanic community, but also how we build coalitions, and we kind of see past that trick of how they're trying to divide us, how they're trying to dilute our power, and how can we be creative and help improve our position politically, which I think we've made some progress, and there's certainly certain states where that's the case. Here in California, as an example, but there's still a lot that needs to be done. And I do feel that in some respects, that's one of the difficulties that the Democratic Party has. Is such a diverse party, very diverse views. So they have a more difficult time sort of riling around one creative strategy, versus the Republicans. They're very good about, okay, no is no, and I'm gonna vote against this, or I'm gonna say the immigrants, Latino immigrants and other immigrants, but in this case, Latino immigrants are the devil incarnate, even though they're the hardest working people. A lot of them are conservative. A lot of them end up in rural areas, and they would be Republican in a heartbeat if they were given the opportunity, if they were embraced by the Republican Party.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's mind-boggling to me.
And also the underfunding of the school system and of the neighborhoods where traditionally you see African Americans or Hispanics, that also has devastating consequences, because that means that the the education is not adequate, the high school dropout rate. And so then that next generation keeps perpetuating that type of lifestyle. So then they have kids, and then the kids are not as successful. Because really the key to all this is the more Hispanics and blacks we can send to colleges, the more we can even things out, and the faster we would do it. But with dropout rates, I haven't checked them recently, but they're really high among Hispanics, or at least they were last time I checked them, among Hispanic and African Americans. With those type of dropout rates, then you can see how the political power gets diluted with all of these different tactics that are used. So, just to wrap this up, then I started with the central question of, is this good? Is this a good thing? What are your thoughts? White population in the United States has been shrinking for the last 5 years. Like, good or bad?
I do think that it's, in my perspective, I think it's good because every study, everything out there says that the more diverse a society is, the better. And I think the U.S. has always been diverse, and even if there's been this push to whitewash Mexican Americans, Italians, Irish, and some of the other folks that perhaps are not considered diverse. I think that ultimately the diversity is what makes this country great, and not only that is really the ideals that we try to live up to, right? The concept of equality under the law, of opportunity, and all these things that we know are ideals. We know that they're not available to everyone because of all of the reasons that you just laid out and that we've been discussing in many of our conversations, but nonetheless is a place where a lot of those dreams can come true, and where there's that dream. So I do think that it's good because I think it also shows that we can be an even more powerful and successful country with that diversity. Now we have the type of diversity that we can connect with people in an authentic way, and probably in countries across the world, and particularly here in our continent. So in my mind, I think is a good thing. I think hopefully this will be just the first step towards forming a continental American Union where there will be free flow of people and ideas between North, Central, and South America, and we can be the best continent and the continent that we've been meant to be all along.
Yeah, and to all the people, to all the white people out there that are scared because of headlines like this, just don't freak out. Right, the white race is not going to disappear. They still have all of the most of the political power. The culture is not going to disappear. There is an American culture. Contrary to popular belief, Hispanics do assimilate, and they assimilate into the American culture. And if anything, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of Hispanics end up being a lot more conservative sometimes than white people. So there you go. You're getting a lot of like potential Republican voters too. So don't fall for those scaremongers out there, or fearmongers that are trying to make it seem like you're going to disappear tomorrow and they want to recruit you into their white nationalist group. That's BS. Hispanics and blacks have been the minority for a long time. So then if that shifts a little bit and then whites become the minority, well, it's just a situation that everybody else has been in before. So don't freak out. Things will be the same. America has its own unique culture, and other cultures that come in here within a generation or two, they assimilate and they become a lot more like everybody else here in America, eating cheeseburgers, hot dogs, and being unhealthy.
Exactly.
And going broke because of lack of healthcare. So don't worry, we're all in the same boat.
Yay.
All right. I think we can wrap it up there. Any final words?
No, I think on that note, we can wrap up the conversation.
All right. So if you all out there enjoy these conversations, make sure to check us out. We are Brown Perspective. Estamos on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Nos vemos.
Ciao.